To say I'm blindsided would be an understatement. My name's Paul Trumby, and until all this came crashing down, I thought I had life somewhat figured out. I'm the CEO of a successful company, the result of years of hard work and too many late nights to count. And yeah, I thought I had a solid marriage to go along with it. Kim and I had been together for years, and we had what I thought was a decent life. A good house, a future we were building, and 2 kids who kept us grounded, or at least kept me grounded. But maybe I'd spent too long trying to hold on to an idea, not realizing I'd been slowly losing it all, piece by piece. Things at home had been tense for a while. We'd have the usual arguments, the ones you shrug off, thinking every marriage has its rough patches. Kim would brush things aside, say she was just stressed, or that I was too obsessed with work. There were subtle signs, like when she started spending more time out of the house or when she'd come home late with vague excuses that didn't quite add up. But I'd chalk it up to busy lives. Figured it was normal, like all couples went through these periods of distance. But turns out, the real truth was a lot darker. About 3 months back, I started noticing something strange happening at work. There were these subtle discrepancies in our finances, just enough to raise a red flag. The numbers didn't make sense, almost like someone was trying to pull one over on me, but I couldn't put my finger on it at first. I have good people handling the books, but this was beyond a little oversight. It was starting to look intentional. So, I hired a corporate investigator, a pro who could dig into things quietly. I just wanted peace of mind, really, thought maybe I'd uncover a mistake, talk it over, and that would be the end of it. But as the investigator got deeper, things started to look worse. The money wasn't just missing, it was slowly, strategically being siphoned out, and it was clear it wasn't going toward anything legitimate. That's when Austin's name came up. Austin Worthington, this slick, well-connected millionaire. A guy I'd seen around a few times, maybe shook hands with at events, but never thought much of. Now I find out he's not only the one involved with Kim, but he's got his hands on the company's finances, pulling funds out without a single hesitation. At first, I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could the 2 of them pull this off under my nose? But as I dug deeper, I realized they'd been working together for a while, long enough to establish a flow that kept them cushioned while bleeding the company dry. And the best part? Kim's mother was in on it, too. She'd always been controlling, loved having the upper hand, but I never expected her to go this far, to support them as they tried to take everything from me. All of a sudden, my life was like one of those daytime dramas I used to mock for being unrealistic, except this time the bad guys were in my own family. Kim and her mother had this whole scheme going to cut me out of my own kid's life too. Kim filed for custody of Richie, calling me unstable and saying I'd turned into some obsessed, paranoid control freak. And her mother? She backed every word, swearing I was emotionally unfit to raise my own son. I'd gone from proud CEO to a father being painted as a danger to his own child. It felt surreal. I'd given everything to keep my family secure, and now they were using that security as a weapon against me. At that point, I knew I had to make some moves of my own. If they were going to treat this like a business war, well, I'd built my career on knowing how to fight those. The first thing I did was move my daughter, Lala, in with my sister Betty, who lives nearby. Betty is rock solid, the one family member who's never let me down, and right now, I needed to know that Lala was safe, away from Kim's lies and her mother's manipulations. And I needed to put my energy into this legal battle. I couldn't let them take Richie from me or rob the company I'd built. If they thought they could play me, they were about to learn I had a few moves of my own. Once Lala was with Betty, I could focus, clear-headed, on the fight ahead. It was like coming out of a fog and finally seeing things for what they were. Kim and Austin had been playing me, not just as a husband but as a business partner, someone they'd string along and take advantage of until I was left with nothing. And with her mother pulling strings behind the scenes, the whole thing felt like a web I'd walked right into. I spent nights looking back on little moments, all the subtle signs that something was off. Now it seemed so obvious that it was all calculated. Kim had always been good with people. She had this charm that could smooth over any situation, convince anyone to side with her, myself included at one time. She'd talk her way out of things with that innocent face, always putting herself in the right and me in the wrong. And I'd buy into it, thinking I was just paranoid, maybe even unreasonable. But now that I knew the truth, I could see how she'd been setting the stage all along. Every time she'd insist she was just networking when she was out late or claim it was for business, it was a setup to normalize her absence and keep me from digging too deep. And I'd swallowed it because I never thought she'd betray me like this. So there I was, juggling the fallout in my personal life while trying to salvage my reputation at work. The investigator I'd hired had gotten hold of enough proof to know this was beyond a fling or a phase. This was a full-blown conspiracy. Austin had not only siphoned money from the company but also used those funds to create shell accounts, feeding Kim and even her mother in ways that left almost no trace. But almost wasn't enough when you've got someone who knows how to dig. The investigator told me he'd found links between Austin's personal accounts and Kim's, transfers that were small enough to stay under the radar but frequent enough to add up over time. It was like peeling back layers, seeing how much they'd taken, and knowing it was happening under my own roof. At the same time, I had to keep up a front at work. I couldn't let anyone know what was happening yet. If word got out that I'd lost control, the company would be at risk, and I couldn't have that. Not when I'd worked so hard to build it. Meanwhile, I kept Kim in the dark, letting her think she was still ahead, that I was clueless. She'd act sweet as honey when she'd come home, barely acknowledging the tension in the air. But I could see the smugness in her eyes, like she'd already won, like she knew I'd be too stunned to fight back. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I started gathering everything: emails, bank statements, records of meetings that could place her and Austin together, sometimes even at the office after hours. I needed an airtight case, something to prove to the court, to everyone, that they'd been planning this all along, and that it wasn't just some personal vendetta. I knew Kim would try to paint me as the bad guy, unstable, paranoid. She was probably banking on my reputation being enough to sway things in her favor, maybe even make me look like the one falling apart. And then there was Richie. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what all of this would do to him. He was just a kid. How could he make sense of his parents at war? And knowing Kim, she'd already be feeding him lines, maybe making me out to be the villain. That thought alone made my blood boil. I could feel her tugging him toward her side, manipulating him the same way she'd manipulated me for years. But he's my son, and I'd be damned if I was going to let them turn him into a pawn. I decided I'd use every ounce of business sense I had, everything I'd learned over the years, to take control back. I wasn't going to play by Kim's rules anymore. If she wanted to betray me, she was going to feel the full weight of it. This wasn't just about getting back at her or Austin. It was about protecting my son, my company, and my own sanity. And I was ready to fight like hell. As I put my plan together, I had to start thinking like a strategist, not a husband who'd just been betrayed. Kim and Austin had clearly banked on me reacting emotionally, expected me to get angry, go off track, and maybe even lose my sense of control. But if I did that, I'd be giving them exactly what they wanted. So I kept my head down and focused on the details, every single move they'd made to hide the money they were stealing from my company. My investigator was essential here. He tracked down every questionable transfer, found hidden accounts under shell companies. These were all steps they'd taken to keep themselves comfortable while emptying out the company's funds. Every time I reviewed the findings, it hit me just how calculated this betrayal had been. They weren't just having an affair, they were systematically taking apart what I'd built, almost like it was nothing. And then there was Marion, Kim's mother. She was working in the shadows too, trying to manipulate things with her old connections. I'd always known she was critical of me, and over-involved in Kim's life, but I never thought she'd get her hands dirty like this. I found out she'd been reaching out to people in the legal system, building a case against me, all under the pretense of protecting her daughter. She was backing Kim's custody claim, portraying me as unstable, like I was some danger to my own child. But I knew what this was really about. Control. Marion wanted Richie with Kim to keep herself in the picture, and she'd stop at nothing to ensure that happened. The anger I felt was real, but I knew I'd have to keep it under wraps if I wanted a chance at winning this. So I held on to every bit of evidence, knowing that when the time came, I'd need it all to dismantle everything they'd built against me. I felt like I was walking on a knife's edge every day, keeping my anger in check while Kim and Austin thought they had me fooled. The more my investigator uncovered, the clearer the betrayal became. Austin had helped set up multiple shell accounts, each one slowly siphoning funds away from my company, adding up to a shocking total. They'd been clever about it, but they underestimated how carefully I'd built this business. Each discovery fueled my resolve, and I knew I had to be just as methodical if I wanted to beat them at their own game. At home, Kim acted as if nothing had changed. She kept up her cheerful routine, still playing the role of the caring wife while spending more nights away for business. Each time she came home, smiling and casual, it was like a slap in the face. But I couldn't let her know I was on to her, not yet. I needed to stay focused on gathering every piece of evidence. Confronting her too soon would only make her dig her heels in deeper, and I wasn't about to give her that advantage. Marion, her mother, had already started spreading her version of things. She was telling everyone who'd listen that I was losing it, that I'd become obsessed with work and was neglecting my family. I heard from a mutual friend that Marion had even hinted I was unfit to be a father, planting seeds of doubt about my character. I could only imagine the stories she'd come up with in court to push for Kim's full custody of Richie. The thought alone made my blood boil, but I knew better than to act on emotion. I was going to need concrete proof, not just to defend myself but to tear down the lies they were building. So, I started gathering my own evidence. I documented everything, every missed family event, every night Kim didn't come home, every dollar that couldn't be explained. It felt strange to turn my own marriage into a case file, but I had no other choice. This was about more than just proving they'd been stealing. It was about proving that I was the parent Richie needed. I couldn't let them win, couldn't let them take my son. So I'd hold on to this patience, using every bit of betrayal as fuel until I had the proof to bring them down. As I documented everything, a strange calm settled in. It was almost surreal, watching myself move through my own life like a stranger, keeping up the routines, pretending I wasn't onto them. Kim's act was perfect. She played the caring wife at home, laughing with Richie and acting like we were the same family we'd always been. But every time she left for another business trip or disappeared for the night, my stomach churned with anger I had to keep buried. If she sensed that I'd figured out what she and Austin were up to, she'd tighten her defenses, maybe even twist the situation to make me look paranoid. I was no stranger to playing the long game. It's what had built my company from the ground up. So, I approached this betrayal like a business deal I was determined to close. I logged every detail, every late night, every shady financial transfer. I even started working with my attorney on a potential custody case for Richie, knowing Kim's mother Marion would try to paint me as an unstable, absentee father. I hated that things had come to this, that I'd have to prove myself in such a personal, painful way, but I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Richie had started asking questions. He was sharp for an 8-year-old, and he noticed the tension no matter how much I tried to shield him from it. He'd ask why his mom wasn't home as often or why I was so quiet at dinner, and I'd have to force a smile, telling him not to worry, that everything was fine. It hurt to see the confusion in his eyes, to know that he was picking up on something he couldn't yet understand. It reminded me of how high the stakes were. This wasn't just about the business or the betrayal. It was about making sure Richie had stability, had a parent who would be there for him no matter what. I was determined to be that parent, no matter what Kim and her mother plotted to do. So, I kept playing along, acting none the wiser. Kim thought she was in control, that I was oblivious to her scheme with Austin. But each time she left the house or looked past me with that false smile, I knew the truth. And soon they would too. After weeks of gathering proof and building a strategy, I was finally getting a solid case together. My investigator had connected the dots on a financial trail that led straight to Austin's personal accounts and then into Kim's. It was all there, months' worth of withdrawals, discreetly disguised as company expenses, trickling into their secret funds. It was enough to make anyone's stomach turn, knowing they'd planned this so meticulously. The extent of their betrayal was staggering. This wasn't just a fling, it was an all-out attempt to undermine me and walk away with everything. I kept up the facade, even as the evidence piled up, showing Kim I was none the wiser. She must have thought she'd covered her tracks well, believing I'd never noticed the late nights or the missing money. But as her confidence grew, so did her carelessness. Once, I even caught a glimpse of a message from Austin on her phone, a simple "see you soon" that she quickly swiped away, as if she didn't have a second thought about hiding it anymore. She'd gotten comfortable, which was exactly what I needed. The more secure she felt, the more likely she'd be to slip up, to leave traces I could use. The hardest part was maintaining my composure around her. It felt like a daily test of endurance. I'd be sitting across from her at dinner, watching her laugh with Richie, acting like the devoted wife, knowing that every moment was a lie. There were times I almost couldn't hold it together, felt myself on the edge of snapping and confronting her right then and there. But I reminded myself what was at stake. Richie's future depended on this going right, on having a solid case that would stand up in court. And then there was Marion. Every time I thought about her involvement, reaching out to her legal contacts, painting me as the unstable parent who didn't care about his family, it pushed me to keep digging, to be even more thorough. She was counting on her influence to sway the court in Kim's favor, but I had no intention of letting her rewrite the truth. I'd make sure that, when the time came, all of their lies would unravel in front of everyone. It was just a matter of time. As things moved forward, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about taking Kim and Austin down, it was about dismantling a life I'd thought was real. Every lie I uncovered chipped away at the foundation of our family. But I couldn't let nostalgia or memories stop me. I had to keep reminding myself that Kim had destroyed those memories the moment she chose to betray me. One afternoon, my attorney laid out the custody battle strategy. We needed to emphasize my commitment to Richie, to prove that I was the stable, present parent in his life. Marion, with her influence and connections, was the wild card. She'd already started reaching out to people in our social circles, spreading rumors about my work obsession and emotional unavailability, carefully setting up her narrative. Marion had always been good at holding the family's image together, and now she was using that same skill to try and tear me down. The stories she spun were all designed to make Kim look like the primary parent, the one holding the family together. But with the documentation I'd gathered, we'd have a strong counterattack. I stayed in touch with Betty through all this. She was a steady source of encouragement, reminding me that Richie deserved a father who wouldn't walk away, who would fight for him. She'd check in on Lala, who was doing well at her place, thankfully shielded from the worst of the tension. Betty's reassurance kept me grounded, reminding me why I was going through all of this, why I was holding back instead of confronting Kim and tearing the truth out into the open. Kim, meanwhile, seemed completely at ease. It was as if she'd come to believe her own lies, convinced I was clueless, and that she'd already won. She continued to keep up appearances, doing the bare minimum to keep our life together looking normal. Each time I caught her looking past me, a quiet smugness in her eyes, I felt my resolve harden. She had no idea what was coming, and I intended to keep it that way until the final moment. It was a strange feeling, this calm before the storm, but I knew I was prepared. The groundwork was set, the evidence stacked. I had one shot at this, and when I finally pulled the rug out from under them, I'd make sure there was nothing they could do to recover. As I waited for the right moment to strike, each day felt like a balancing act, a steady routine I held onto to keep myself from unraveling. I'd go to work, pour my energy into the company, all while keeping one eye on the mess Kim and Austin had created. My lawyer urged patience, saying we needed to let the evidence accumulate until there was no possible way they could spin it. The goal was to expose everything: financial fraud, adultery, even the custody manipulation, without giving them any legal loophole to escape. Meanwhile, Marion continued to tighten her web, quietly influencing anyone she thought might support Kim in the custody case. She'd taken to subtly distancing mutual friends and acquaintances from me, feeding them stories that hinted at my supposed instability. Friends who used to call or stop by suddenly stopped reaching out, and I couldn't ignore the looks of sympathy or suspicion from those who still did. The damage Marion was doing was quiet but effective, painting me as an unbalanced father on the brink. It was frustrating, watching her plant these seeds without the means to counter them just yet. But I knew that acting too soon would ruin everything I'd worked for. At home, Kim continued to act like everything was normal. She didn't miss a beat, playing the perfect wife, going through her daily routine as if nothing were amiss. She'd even started making more of an effort with Richie, no doubt to build her own case. She'd help him with his homework, take him to his soccer games, and even show up to school events she'd usually skip. I knew it was all for show, another part of the carefully constructed image she was crafting for the court. Richie seemed thrilled with her sudden interest, oblivious to the fact that it was only temporary, just another tactic to secure her position. Inside, the sight of it all made me sick. But I kept my focus, telling myself that every false move they made only strengthened my case. I reminded myself that Marion and Kim's scheme, no matter how well executed, couldn't withstand hard evidence and a solid legal strategy. It was a bitter pill to swallow, watching Kim use Richie's affection for her advantage. Yet, I knew that if I played this right, Richie would see the truth someday. He'd understand that I was the parent who stayed consistent, who didn't manipulate him as part of some grand plan. The days grew longer, the tension thickened, but I knew we were almost there. The evidence was nearly complete, and soon, I'd be able to unveil the truth. For now, I just had to keep holding on, maintaining my calm, and waiting for the moment when I could finally show them that I wasn't the fool they'd taken me for. The more I watched Kim and Marion manipulate our lives, the more focused I became. My attorney kept updating me on how we'd approach each angle of the case: financial fraud, infidelity, and custody. Every piece of evidence had to be positioned perfectly, each document timed to dismantle the narrative they'd been crafting. We were building a defense, yes, but also an offense. This wasn't just about protecting my relationship with Richie, it was about exposing their betrayal so completely that there'd be no question who was in the wrong. Kim was still blissfully unaware that I was closing in on her. In fact, her confidence had only grown. She'd even started inviting Austin over for business discussions, when she thought I'd be out late. I'd drive home and see his sleek car parked a few blocks down, trying to stay inconspicuous but failing miserably. The audacity of it almost floored me, and the temptation to barge in, to demand answers right then and there, was overwhelming. But I held back, knowing that patience would pay off. This was just more evidence for my case, a blatant disregard for our marriage, proof that she'd chosen her path without a shred of guilt. One evening, Richie asked why Mom seemed extra nice lately. I could see his confusion, how he noticed her sudden attention and presence, which was unusual given her usual preoccupation with her own life. I told him it was because she loved him, trying to soften the truth he couldn't fully grasp. It hurt to see him light up, thinking his mom had suddenly turned over a new leaf. But I knew the reality was far less idealistic. Her affection was nothing more than a ploy to strengthen her custody claims. I hated seeing him used this way, but I also knew that I was working to ensure he wouldn't have to experience this manipulation for long. My attorney called the next day to confirm we were almost ready. The final pieces were falling into place, and soon, we'd have enough evidence to file everything at once. He reminded me that this approach would allow no room for them to prepare a defense. The plan was to hit them hard and fast, to reveal Kim and Austin's theft from the company, their affair, and her manipulative custody play all in one blow. I'd worked too hard for this to be anything less than airtight. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step forward would mean no going back. But as I looked at Richie, I felt no hesitation. This was for him, to show him the truth, to protect him from the games they were playing. I'd built my life on hard work and honesty, and I wasn't about to let Kim, Marion, and Austin destroy that. Soon, they'd all know the truth, and when the dust settled, I'd be the one left standing with Richie by my side. The day of the trial finally came, and the tension was palpable. I'd spent months preparing for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare me for the sight of Kim sitting across from me in the courtroom. She looked composed, confident even, and by her side sat Austin, looking just as smug as he always did. Marion was there too, leaning in close to Kim, whispering with that knowing expression on her face. I felt a wave of anger rise up, but I kept my focus. Today wasn't about emotion. It was about truth. My attorney went in hard right from the start, laying out the evidence we'd collected on the financial fraud. Every bank statement, every transfer, every hidden account. They were all presented in meticulous detail, showing exactly how Kim and Austin had drained funds from the company. Austin's attorney tried to brush it off as a misunderstanding, but our case was tight, every discrepancy lined up and accounted for. The judge's expression grew more serious as each piece of evidence came to light. It was clear that this wasn't just a minor error, it was deliberate theft, and everyone in that courtroom could see it. Kim's face remained calm, but I could tell from the way she avoided my gaze that she felt the pressure mounting. When we moved on to the proof of her infidelity, I finally saw a crack in her composure. My attorney introduced emails, phone records, and photos that left little room for denial. There were timestamps matching her business trips to Austin's travel itinerary, along with records from the hotels they'd stayed in together. Kim's attorney tried to object, claiming the evidence was invasive, but the judge allowed it. It was all part of painting the picture of her deception, a betrayal that ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. Then came the custody battle, the part I dreaded most. Marion had done her best to turn Richie into a pawn, positioning Kim as the more stable parent, claiming I was distant and overly consumed by work. She had arranged for friends to testify, people who'd been swayed by her stories of my obsession with my career. But when my attorney presented evidence of my involvement in Richie's life, pictures, school reports, testimonies from people who actually knew me as a father, it was like watching their carefully built narrative collapse. The judge took notice, clearly not convinced by Marion's skewed portrayal. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. The truth was out in the open, and the strength of their lies was fading fast. Kim and Austin had planned meticulously, but they'd underestimated just how far I'd go to protect my son. As the session closed for the day, I left the courtroom knowing we'd struck a major blow. The next day in court, Kim and her team scrambled to regain control. Marion, ever the strategist, took the stand with a calm, practiced demeanor. She painted a portrait of Kim as the devoted mother, one who'd sacrificed everything for Richie while dealing with an unreliable, emotionally distant husband. She referenced times when I'd worked late, claiming I was practically absent from Richie's life. Her tone was smooth and persuasive, and for a moment, I could see the judge listening intently, her words resonating. But then it was my attorney's turn. He pulled out our counter-evidence, a detailed timeline I'd put together with care. Photos from Richie's birthdays, field trip sign-ups, and parent-teacher conferences were all included, showing I was present at key moments in Richie's life. Then my attorney shifted to focus on Marion's interference and manipulations, reminding the court that Marion wasn't an unbiased observer. She was, after all, a grandmother determined to secure custody for her daughter. And then the turning point came. My attorney requested permission to enter the financial documents into evidence, proof of the company funds Kim and Austin had siphoned off, funds that they had carefully concealed. As each record was displayed, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even Kim's attorney seemed taken aback by the sheer volume of evidence. Marion's carefully controlled expression faltered as the judge scrutinized the transfers, watching the numbers and dates line up, piece by piece. Kim's lawyer tried to recover, painting the theft as a business misunderstanding, but the evidence was undeniable. I could see Kim's facade beginning to crack, her confidence slipping with each piece of information we presented. She hadn't expected this level of exposure, hadn't thought that I'd be able to trace her and Austin's every move. Then, just when it seemed they were cornered, the judge addressed Kim directly, asking her to explain the transactions and why they had been routed through Austin's account. For a moment, she stammered, then regained her composure and claimed she trusted Austin's financial judgment and had been misled. But the damage was done. The judge was clearly unimpressed by her excuse. As we left the courtroom that day, I felt the balance shift. Their lies were finally beginning to catch up with them. They'd orchestrated this elaborate betrayal, but now it was unraveling faster than they could repair it. And I could tell they knew it. After days of grueling testimony, the court's decisions began to lean in my favor. With evidence stacking up and their story unraveling, the judge ordered a more in-depth review of both Kim's and Austin's financial dealings. I'd never thought it possible, but everything they'd worked to build, the reputation, the influence, the connections, was falling apart right before their eyes. In the final session, my attorney moved forward with a motion I'd been preparing for: termination of Kim's parental rights. I didn't come to this decision lightly. It weighed on me, thinking of Richie and what it would mean for him. But after the court saw proof of Kim's manipulations, the financial theft, and her clear disregard for our family's well-being, it was evident that she wasn't fit to play an active role in Richie's life. The judge took his time, reviewing each detail, and when he finally ruled in favor of terminating Kim's rights, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I hadn't wanted to go this far, but I knew Richie deserved a parent who wouldn't use him as leverage, who would give him the stability he needed. But that wasn't the end of it. In addition to the custody ruling, the judge allowed the records of Kim and Austin's financial misconduct to be publicized in a professional forum. This was exactly the outcome I'd hoped for. They'd tried to take everything from me, but now it was their own reputation on the line. The news spread quickly in the business community, exposing them for what they truly were. It wasn't long before Kim was asked to step down from her position, and Austin's career took a nosedive too. Kim and Austin's names became toxic in the industry. I started hearing from colleagues that their phone calls weren't getting returned, that no one wanted to be associated with people who'd betrayed not only their families but their own company. The connections they'd so carefully cultivated began to vanish, and soon they were struggling even to get a foot in the door. It didn't take long for the full weight of their actions to hit them. I'd seen Austin as this smooth, self-assured man, confident that his wealth and connections could cover any mess he made. But with his reputation in ruins, he was finding that doors that had once been wide open were now closed. And Kim, she'd always believed she was untouchable, that she could manipulate people without facing consequences. But she was now left with nothing, her reputation shattered, and any sense of stability she'd once had crumbling around her. I knew this wouldn't erase the damage they'd caused, but it was justice. And as I watched them face the consequences, I finally felt a sense of closure. It was a rainy afternoon when I heard the knock on the door, faint but insistent. I opened it to find Kim and her mother Marion, standing there, drenched and looking almost unrecognizable. Kim's face was swollen, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, while Marion's usual confident demeanor had faded into something desperate and pleading. They both looked like shadows of the people they once were. Two women who'd built their lives on control, now humbled and broken. They stood there in silence for a moment, and then, to my shock, Kim fell to her knees. Marion followed, lowering herself beside her daughter, and they began to beg for forgiveness. Kim's voice was trembling, barely a whisper, as she apologized for everything. Her betrayal, her lies, her manipulation. She pleaded for a second chance, saying she had nowhere to turn, no one left to help her. Marion tried to appeal to the memories of our years together, reminding me of the family we'd once been. But it all felt hollow. I could see that this wasn't about regret or redemption. It was about desperation. They'd lost everything and were now facing the consequences of the life they'd tried to destroy. I stayed silent, watching them kneel there, rain dripping down their faces. I could feel a strange calm come over me, a sense of finality. This was the closure I hadn't even realized I needed, their realization, too late, of the damage they'd done. I told them there was nothing left to forgive, that the life I'd built with them was over, and that I'd moved on to protect the only family that mattered to me now: Richie, Lala, and my sister Betty. 2 days later, I finalized the sale of the house to a neighbor who'd been interested for some time. It was a good deal, and I felt an immense relief knowing I'd never have to walk those halls again, haunted by memories of what could have been. I packed up Richie and Lala and moved in with Betty, who'd been there for us since the beginning. Her house felt like a new start, a place filled with genuine love and family, things that Kim and Marion had pretended to offer but never truly gave. The kids adjusted quickly to life with their aunt. Richie, especially, seemed more at ease, laughing more freely than he had in months. I could finally see the tension lifting from him, the weight of the lies and manipulation his mother had brought into our lives easing as he settled into this new, stable environment. And for me, it was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild from the wreckage they'd left behind, with the people who'd stood by me through it all. Settling into Betty's place felt like stepping into a new chapter for all of us. For the first time in months, Richie and Lala seemed genuinely happy, like a weight had lifted from their young shoulders. Betty's house was cozy and welcoming, filled with warmth and laughter, the kind of environment they hadn't had in a long time. Betty was amazing with the kids, giving them all the love and support they needed. She'd always been their cool aunt, and now, living with her full-time, they were finally able to relax, to just be kids again. I watched Richie adjust quickly to our new setup. He seemed more at ease here, spending his afternoons after school playing in Betty's backyard, kicking around a soccer ball or riding his bike up and down the block. I'd catch him laughing with Lala or running to show Betty something he'd built or drawn, a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Lala, too, blossomed in this new environment. She'd always been a quieter kid, but here, she came out of her shell, following her big brother around and even starting to pick up on his love for soccer. A few weeks in, I got an offer from the neighbor next door to Betty. They were planning to move and were willing to sell me the place at a reasonable price. It was an unexpected opportunity, and I jumped at it. The idea of having our own home right next to Betty's was perfect, and I knew the kids would be thrilled. We'd be close enough to still have that family support but with a fresh start, a new place we could call our own. It took some time to close the deal, but soon enough, we had the keys, and I let Richie and Lala be the first to open the door to our new home. To celebrate, Betty suggested we do something special for the kids. Richie had been asking about getting a dog for months, and now seemed like the right time. So one weekend, we drove to a local shelter, and as soon as Richie saw a little brown and white beagle mix with big, curious eyes, he was in love. Lala clung to me, wide-eyed as the dog wagged its tail and licked her hand, and that sealed the deal. We named him Buddy, and from the moment we brought him home, he fit right in. Buddy became a source of pure joy, a playful, comforting presence that helped us all move forward. Seeing the kids' faces light up as they played with Buddy, running through our new backyard and laughing, made me realize just how far we'd come. This wasn't just a new house. It was the beginning of a life built on honesty, trust, and love, the things that really mattered. Watching Richie and Lala with Buddy, in a home where they were safe and truly loved, I knew we were exactly where we needed to be. After the trial, it was like a dark cloud had finally lifted, not just over my personal life, but over my business too. With Kim and Austin's schemes exposed, I was able to regain full control of the company. The financial hit from their theft had hurt, but with them out of the picture, I could finally steer the business back in the right direction, free from the sabotage and distrust they'd created. In the months that followed, I invested every bit of energy into rebuilding. I brought on new partners, trusted, talented people who believed in the company's values. With a solid team backing me, we expanded into new markets, launched innovative products, and saw growth like never before. The betrayal I'd gone through had given me a sharper focus and a stronger drive to succeed. And with no one there to undercut my work or siphon off profits, the business flourished. Financially, I'd never been more secure. Profits soared, new investors came in, and before long, I was able to turn the loss they'd caused into an even greater gain. Ironically, all the deceit Kim and Austin had used to try to take me down had only fueled my determination to thrive. I'd not only recovered but had expanded my wealth far beyond what it had been before, securing a future that Richie and Lala would one day inherit. And yet, it wasn't the money or success that mattered most to me now. It was the life I had waiting for me when I came home. Evenings were spent around the dinner table with Betty, Richie, Lala, and Buddy sprawled out at our feet. We'd talk about our day, watch movies together, and go on long walks with Buddy through the neighborhood. Richie's laughter, Lala's hugs, and Betty's steadfast presence reminded me that I was surrounded by the most loyal, loving people in my life. In every way, I'd never been happier. I was free from the lies, free from manipulation, living a life that was honest and fulfilling. I could see Richie and Lala growing up in an environment filled with genuine love, kindness, and trust. And each day, I felt grateful that I hadn't let Kim's betrayal ruin me or my family. We'd come through stronger, and I knew that whatever the future held, we'd face it together. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace.